your attention, please? Get started with the program. Can everyone hear me okay? Thank you. I want to welcome everybody to the networking event today, our 14th annual event, which the Academy sponsors with Northern Trust. Introduce myself. My name is John Marlette. I'm a member of the class of 65, a long time ago. I have the honor to be chairman of the Board of Trustees, which I'm very excited about. It's an institution I love. I'm going to leave the formal introductions to the panelists, to John, but there are a couple of guests in the audience that I'd like to recognize, and I'd ask that as I call the names, they stand, and then maybe we can hold the applause until the end. First, I want to introduce a former trustee, David Gupta. David is class of 1981, and he, I've been told, was the seed for this idea of having a network event 14 years ago, so we thank him for that. Secondly, I'd ask Charlie Cooper of the class of 96 to stand. Charlie is an important member of the board and Lake Forest resident and a great supporter of the school. Next, Patrick Corsiglia, who is a board member. And importantly, he's had 3 children that are Lake Forest Academy students or graduates, so we love parents. Next, one of my favorite people, Gloria Harper. Gloria, would you stand, please? Gloria is a life trustee, and she has contributed in just about every way possible, as a parent, as a teacher, as a dean, as a member of the board, as just a plain booster. Love to have you here. Thank you. Next, Dwayne Jackson of the class of 2001. Is Dwayne here? There was some question he might not be able to make it. I guess he's not. Oh, is he here?
Empty chair.
Oh, empty chair. Okay. Okay. Dwayne's also on the board. He's soon to be our chairman of the finance committee. Scott Kaiser of the class of 96. I saw Scott here. Other board member. I'd like to call Jeff Keller a mentor for me. Class is 87, parent, and a former chair. Trustee Eric Kimball, I think, is here. Maybe not. He did not make it. He's from the class of 85, board member, a good contributor to the school. And finally, Michael Springer of the class of 71. There's Michael. Finally, I'd like to recognize the many students that made their way down to Chicago to witness this event. Networking is a very important thing, and you need to learn how to do it quickly. I hope that if those folks who are here, the students, could you stand and be recognized? Well, for the last 14 years, LFA has been privileged to be able to hold this event at the Northern Trust, and it's mainly because of our close relationship with Rick and Kate Waddell. Kate and Rick are very strong supporters of the school, have been for many years. Kate, in fact, was board chair for a number of years, and they've had 2 children that have graduated from LFA. So they couldn't be here today, but I want to thank them for having their support be so consistent and strong, and to allow us to use their beautiful building. This is a special year for the event. It's our 14th, but it is the last event that John Strudwick will be the host of, as he's passing the reins to our next head of school, Jose De Jesus, who's coming from the I'm blanking, Packer School, Packer Collegiate in New York. Jose is a terrific addition to the family, and we're looking forward to the transition. But we're really going to miss John. I think we owe John quite a bit for his leadership, for his vision, for his unbelievable work ethic, and what we've accomplished in his 18 years is absolutely unbelievable. And I'd like to ask everyone to give him a round of applause.
Brings tears to your eyes, doesn't it? Thank you for that. I appreciate it. And I appreciate all of the support from many of the folks in the audience regarding this past 18 years, and for the students and some of the younger alums. Lake Forest Academy looks forward to your support of the school over the next 18 years and beyond. So thank you. So some formal words to start with, and then I'll introduce the panelists and we'll get started. So on behalf of Lake Forest Academy, I'd like to welcome everyone to the 14th annual Chicago networking event. And personally, I'll add to John's remarks, really want to thank Kate and Rick Waddell for their support and for helping to make this happen, and also to Northern Trust as an institution for their support and their partnership. This is a glorious place for us to hold this, and I really thank them for it. Now, the objective of the CNE is to provide a productive networking and professional development opportunity for our Chicago area alumni, parents, and their associates, to highlight the strengths of the LFA community and to forge connections among its members. And as John mentioned, in addition to alumni and parents, we've got a number of members of the Board of Trustees and also former board members and life trustees here today, which I think is excellent and really demonstrates the support from that group. As John also mentioned, David Gupta is here today, and I was part of this sort of whatever discussion that we had that many years ago, and it was really David, though, that said we really need to raise the profile of Lake Forest Academy, particularly in the Chicago area and particularly for our Chicago alumni. Let's put on world-class panels, bring them to Chicago, get our alumni and parents and alumni advisory board and trustees, bring them together for it. And I think to start with, this is good. David, if you want to do this, please go ahead and organize it. We have to run a school, and this isn't something that just kind of happens. But he was persistent, and I think 14 years later, I hope you're very proud of what that seed has really grown into, and I know we are. And I thank you very much for that and for all of your support. I think it's a tremendously important event for the Academy. It really does provide us with a high profile, so thank you. But not only is this opportunity for networking, but we have really tried to provide, I think, current and meaningful presentations and discussions on important social and business topics. And today we're going to examine a very important current issue, a hot political issue in many ways, as we discuss the economics and politics of healthcare in the United States and the world. Before we get on to that, just going to say a couple of words about the Academy, as I normally do at this event. I'm very proud of being the head at LFA. I'm proud of what we've done. I'm proud of where we are. We're a school with very strong admissions, tremendous college placement, improving facilities, innovative teaching, and most importantly, a very highly talented and diverse student body. 34 countries this year, 17 states. Engaged in what can only say demanding imaginative and creative work in the classrooms. And we have a very clear mission of education in promoting in our students excellence of character, scholarship, citizenship and responsibility, our 4 missions, as well as educating the whole child so our students are exposed to excellence in academics, athletics and the arts. And I'm also proud that Lake Forest Academy is now recognized as one of the very best schools, not only in Illinois where we're within the 1 or 2 range of best public or private. I think we're the #1 school in Illinois, personally. Again, I'm biased. But we're also listed amongst the top 20 boarding schools across the nation. We used to compare ourselves maybe to not quite at that level, but now we compare ourselves to the top 20. And I think that achievement, you'll see my point here in a moment, for a school, that achievement to be in that sort of category, when we're a school with an endowment that is 3% in endowment size compared to Andover and Exeter, who are 2 of the other schools in the top 20, not surprisingly, is pretty remarkable. Now obviously we're working on that. We're working to try and improve our endowment because we recognize that's an area where we really need to. But for us to be talked about in the same category as the Lawrencevilles, as the Deerfields, as the Andovers and Exeters, when their endowments are huge multiples of where ours is, I think is remarkable. But again, we are working on it, and my guess is you might hear from Mr. Butler or somebody else during the course of the next year regarding that. Back to the theme. So our theme today, the economics and politics of healthcare, I think it's a topic of great significance to us all in today's world. I have to say that as someone that grew up in the National Health Service in the United Kingdom in the 1950s, 60s and 70s, I was born in 54, and I left the UK in 1978-9. Happened to coincide when Margaret Thatcher became Prime Minister. That's another story. But where I never paid for any medical service, my parents didn't either, nor really had to worry about access. In fact, Dr. Evans, my doctor when I was growing up, used to come to the house. Think about that. Yeah. But raises a point. But anyway, I do find that the United States system, and obviously been here a long time, provides incredibly high quality care. But it does tend to be somewhat exclusive, expensive, and I would argue inefficient. But at the same time, what do I know? I'm kind of an ed finance economist about to go onto Medicare, so I think I've got to put that in context. So today, the Academy hopes to further the discussion on the role and importance of healthcare provision and reform. Our panelists will share their insight, experience and expertise in the topic, and I think it promises to be an illuminating and fascinating discussion. For the format today, I'll introduce each speaker in turn. They'll speak from here. They'll speak for about 5 to 10 minutes. I think we're working on about a 7-minute, right? 6, 7. And then once all the panelists have presented, I'll open it up to the floor for a question and answer session. Sound good? So, our first speaker is Dr. Barbara Deal. Barbara is Emerita Professor of Pediatrics at Northwestern University's Feinberg School of Medicine and the past Division Head of Cardiology at the Ann and Robert H. Lurie Children's Hospital, Chicago. Barbara received her undergraduate degree from Duke and a medical degree from Northwestern. She completed her pediatric residency training at Children's Memorial Hospital and cardiology fellowship at the Children's Hospital in Boston. During her tenure as division head of cardiology at Northwestern, its Heart Center national ranking rose from 23rd to 3rd nationally, and obviously a very impressive achievement. Now, her present focus is on the prevention of obesity in young children and creating greater access to healthcare, particularly preventative. Combining her background in pediatric cardiology with training in nutrition and obesity medicine, Dr. Deal's goal is to disseminate informed nutritional and cardiac advice to prevent the development of childhood obesity and the associated lifetime of acquired diseases. And importantly for Lake Forest Academy, Barbara is the wife of Lake Forest Academy's alumnus, Dr. Bert Schell. class of 1967. Please welcome Barbara Deal.
Thank you, John and John. My husband's family has been deeply associated with Lake Forest Academy since 1961, and I know that means I must be their granddaughter or something, but it's a real honor for me to be able to give something back to the Academy from which our family has benefited so deeply. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So when I look at this title, it says Economics and Politics of Healthcare, and I'm the healthcare part. I'm not the economics or politics. So back to this title, non-communicable diseases are this awkward term that the medical community has given to diseases that we acquire through our habits of lifestyle. So heart disease, stroke, diabetes, lung cancer, and chronic lung disease. So these are not congenital, and they are not infectious, and they are curable. And so that is the focus of my effort. Now, for most of my career, 27 years of it, I focused on congenital heart disease. There's not a pointer, is that right? Or there it is. No. And so as you recall, the heart has 4 chambers. You're going to show me how?
Yeah.
This one? That's the forward? But is there a pointer? Oh, okay. Just to remind you, a normal heart has 2 beating chambers, the right side and the left side. And my area of expertise was in children who lacked one of those chambers. And specifically, my area of expertise was the electricity in the heart of people who lacked a chamber. So you can see it was a little bit of an arcane topic, and it was fascinating. And people came from around the world to us for this care. But then during that time, when we moved downtown, I began to listen to the adult cardiologists talking about adult obesity, and obesity wasn't on the radar screen for children with congenital heart disease. And if you would look only at this side, this is 1986, and it's color-coded for the percentage of adults in the country who had obesity. And light blue is less than 10%, and this blue is 10 to 14%. And what you'll notice is that in 1986, not one state in the country had more than 14% of its population obese. Although I'm not supposed to talk about politics, Earl Butz instituted the agricultural subsidy for corn in about 1972, which gave rise to the manufacture of high fructose corn syrup. Fast forward to 2015 and look at the map of obesity in the United States. And what you'll first notice is there's no blue. So there's no state in the United States that has fewer than 14% obese. And the vast majority are over 30% obese. The statistics nationally are that 40% of adults are obese and another 32% are overweight. So we are 72% obese or overweight. Something changed, and that is not genetics. So then if we look back and we look at children, all children are born a healthy weight. They didn't start out this way. And by the time they are 2 years old, 5 years old, actually 0 to 2, 14% of children in this country are obese. And then if you move to children, 18%, adolescents, 21%, and then the glory of adulthood in this country are the 40% are obese, and it's no mystery why they're holding a sugar-sweetened beverage, because it's a major contributor to disease in this country. So I started thinking and doing the numbers. The disease that I was an expert in affects fewer than 50,000 people on the planet. And in the city of Chicago, there are over 700,000 obese and overweight children. And I thought, I've spent a lot of time on this other problem, and maybe there's a bigger problem, a forest for the trees issue. So I started paying more attention. There are also racial and ethnic disparities in health that are really quite profound. The map on the left is for Hispanics, and you see that they're heavily hit, particularly in the Midwest and the South, by obesity. And on the right are African Americans, and they are very heavily hit. Cardiologists lovingly refer to the South as the stroke belt for obvious reasons. And this is an access to care, and it is more complicated than that. African Americans die from heart disease in far greater numbers than others. So the leading causes of death in the United States in 2017, #1, heart disease. So 1 in 3 of us in this room, 1 in 3 at every table, will die of acquired heart disease. Not the one I'm an expert in, but acquired. 1 in 3 of us. That's a lot of us in this room. Cancer, diabetes, that's a little equivocal. Some numbers can say unintentional injuries as number 3. Lung disease, chronic lower respiratory disease, and stroke. All of these are caused in part by obesity. And so if you addressed obesity, you would address these diseases. And did I mention cancer and obesity? There are now 13 cancers who are linked to obesity. And if you cured obesity, you would cure these cancers. That doesn't sound that hard, right? If you had a pill that would cure cancer called weight loss, wouldn't you sign up for it? And these are the names of those cancers. So about that time, I also looked at the cost of this, and in the most recent year, the direct cost of heart disease without stroke is $200 billion. About half of that is indirect, meaning that it's the lost productivity, and half of it goes to the care, but not the chronic nursing care. So you see it's about $340 billion for diseases of the heart, stroke, hypertension. And this is a big, big, big problem facing us. How do we pay for it? And it's projected to go up. So right now, our healthcare costs for heart disease total are about $686 billion. And by 2035, we're expected to pay $7 trillion for these diseases. So that's when I went back and I got board certified in obesity medicine, which is largely adult medicine specialist. And I'm finishing my master's degree in nutrition at U of I, and I should graduate in May 9th if I get my term paper and my homework, which is a real struggle. So if you look at these 4 factors, what you eat, how active you are, your weight, and whether you smoke, and you optimize those risks, just those 4, you would prevent over 80% of heart disease and diabetes, and you would cure over 40% of cancer in this country. Those are not pills. We would save 90% more lives, and we would decrease healthcare costs by 30%. So I think we need to eat well, move more, live longer, and live healthier, and I'll end it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Excellent. Our second speaker is Ahmed Farag. Dr. Farag is the president of Diagnostic Imaging Specialists of Chicago. A native of Montreal, Dr. Farag received his BS degree in human physiology from McGill, where he also earned his MD and Master of Surgery degrees. Dr. Farag has experience in both the Canadian and US healthcare systems. He completed his residency at McGill's Royal Vic Hospital, where he was chief resident, and his fellowship training at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. In 2000, Dr. Farag joined Northeast Radiology Associates, where he provided services to the patients and physicians at Lake Forest Hospital and its imaging facilities. From 03 through 09, he served as vice chairman and then chairman of the radiology department at Lake Forest Hospital. In 2009, Dr. Farag launched Diagnostic Imaging Specialists, working to provide comprehensive, fully digital women's imaging services to Chicagoland physicians and their patients. Dr. Farag currently serves on the board of directors for the Cremo Center for Women and Children, and is also the board president at Lake Forest Country Day School. He and his wife Melissa are the parents of a Lake Forest Academy 9th grader, Bella, who's with us today. Dr. Farag has a clear insight into the differences in healthcare systems, particularly between the Canadian and US options, which has often obviously come up in the news. And it is that focus that he will speak about today. Please welcome Ahmed Farag.
Thanks, John. Thanks for the invitation to come and speak today. Thanks, John Marlett, as well, and to Northern Trust. And thanks for everybody here for being here today. So my background is that I was in Montreal and Canada. I trained over there, and I worked there for a very short time during my last year of residency before coming down to the States. And just observing the differences in healthcare and how it's delivered was pretty compelling. So what I'm going to do in a short period of time, try and go through a very complex mess of how the systems are put together. And you'll see it's kind of cut and paste in some places, especially in the United States. So we'll start really quickly with just a quick rundown of how the systems are broken down. So in the United States, we've got a multi-payer system where you've got 3 different, or actually 4 different payers when it comes to medical care. First is the private payer, the insurance companies, where employees will get insurance from their employer. Medicare, which is a publicly funded system, and Medicaid and CHIP, which is the Children's Health Care program. If you look at the numbers, 56% of the Americans are under the private pay scenario. People with Medicare over 65, 15%, and then you have 20% of people on Medicare and the CHIP program. American hospitals and physicians are generally private, right? So Northwestern Hospital, Northwestern Memorial is private, North Shore is a private system, and you have physicians who are private entities. What I've noticed really recently is that there's been this really strong trend towards consolidation, where hospital systems buy smaller hospitals, buy physicians' practices, and then employ the physicians. And that's one of the models that exists. And in that scenario, the hospitals get paid, and they pay their physicians. So one thing people don't realize is these reimbursement rates and numbers get negotiated, right? So hospitals will negotiate the reimbursement rates with your Blue Cross, your Humana, your Aetna, your Cigna, and they're not all getting the same amount for the same procedures across the board. But the hospitals are really good at negotiating because they're the big powerhouses in this scenario. They're providing cardiac surgery, orthopedic surgery, and really complex things where private doctors can't really provide them in smaller hospitals, right? So they can negotiate really good reimbursement rates. At that point, it becomes really expensive. The other branch of what reimbursement goes for physicians is going to be the private doctor who works in their office, who then bills directly to the insurance companies and Medicare, whoever is paying for it. Those doctors can't negotiate with the insurance companies, so they're paid less, right? So the hospitals are paid at a really high rate, and the private practitioners are paid a little bit lower because they can't negotiate. And that's what you tell your kids. You get what you get, and you don't get upset, right? As opposed to the hospitals, you get what you negotiate. Canada's a little different, right? So we have a system where it's a single payer. And the way that works is the government pays the physicians and pays the hospitals. And the government has these hospitals and physicians under a very strict budget annually. It's a publicly funded system through tax dollars, both federal and provincial. So when you pay your taxes in Canada, you're paying federal taxes, provincial taxes. Those monies go to the government, which then pays for healthcare. The provincial government is responsible for paying for healthcare. The federal government subsidizes it a little bit. Okay. If you look at the overall costs for healthcare throughout both systems, about $6,300 per person per year in Canada, and over $9,000 a year per person per year in the United States. Quite a difference. But what people have to realize is that healthcare in Canada is not really free. You're paying for it. Again, Canadian hospitals, same thing. They're private entities, but they are so tightly budgeted that they're a little bit restricted on how much they can do on a regular basis, right? Again, the fees are fixed and set by the province. They have a provincial budget, and all the hospitals get generally the same amount reimbursement for every procedure that they do across the board. One of the things to note is that if you're a physician practicing in Canada, you have to bill the government. You bill the provincial government. If you have patients who want to pay for their care, or if you want to make more money, you would have to kind of opt out of the medical system, but you can't use the Medicare system to supplement your income. So if you have a patient who wants to pay, they have to pay full. They can't use the Medicare and then have additional payment to it. One of the things that people don't realize is what's not covered by Canadian medicine when you're there. Okay, so prescription drugs, over-the-counter medications, obviously dental, vision, long-term care. If you have knee surgery, you need to see a physiotherapist, you have to pay for the physiotherapist. It's not covered. If you decide you want to get an MRI, you have to go out of the hospital system, you have to pay for it. It's not covered either. In that way, 65% of Canadians actually take supplemental insurance. You never hear about that. And the cost per household is approximately $4,000 each. Oftentimes that's subsidized by employers. So where do the dollars come from? In the US, insurance premiums that you and I pay are taxes, insurance deductibles, and co-pays. And again, we pay again with the insurance deductibles and co-pays. And in the overall picture, 16% of the American GDP goes towards healthcare, whereas in Canada, it's about 10%. Okay. In Canada, the dollars are coming from federal income tax, which in the highest tax bracket is 33%. Provincial income tax, which varies depending on the province, as high as 24.75% in Quebec. So the combined tax rates in every province range as high and can get as high as 53%. And those numbers exceed any tax rates we have in the United States. Right? So where the money's coming from in Canada, it's your taxes. Having worked up there, I can say that the quality of care on this side of the border and that side of the border is really good. Both are equally strong and solid. Right? So if you need cardiac surgery here or there, they're equally good. Services are phenomenal, and the physicians are great. Well trained. And one thing to note is most Canadian physicians are actually American board certified. They take their American boards as well. So what are the problems with the two systems? Right? So the first, let's look at the United States, real brief and simple. We have 28 million people, or over 8%, who have no health insurance. So how are they going to get care? And the other is the cost. It's expensive. Whereas in Canada, you're waiting. You're waiting a long time to get in to see your specialist. So the wait times in the US, not so bad, right? If I want to get an MRI and I decide I need to get an MRI for my knee, called my doctor, sent an order to my to the place I wanted to go, I got in 5 days. At an appointment that was convenient for me and for my wife, because she got an MRI the same day. Right? So your doctors are essentially calling you to come on in. In Canada, we have a problem. Because of the limited funds and resources they have with regards to the budgeting and the rationing of healthcare, first, to see a specialist, you have to see your primary care physician and get a paper referral. After that, you're waiting, and you're waiting, and you're waiting. The average is approximately 21 weeks to get in to see a specialist north of the border. In New Brunswick, where I actually worked during my last year of residency, the wait times are 42 weeks. So this is for elective stuff, but still, you know, it takes a long time to get care. To get an MRI, my 5 days here, 10 to 11 weeks up there, at least. The budgets restrict the resources they have. And the physicians are capped with their salaries. There's a set budget for amount of money that goes to pay doctors. Physicians are capped, and they're not paid more. So what's the cost of waiting, right? People don't think about this. In 2017, the Fraser Institute published a great paper. And people who were waiting for health care because they couldn't work, total amount of dollars lost, approximately $1.9 billion of wages. In a country that has 37 million people, which is the equivalent of the population of California. Also, recent analysis looked at 11 wealthy nations in the world. Canada was the slowest to deliver healthcare. So I can anecdotally tell you, I've been through this a couple of times with my family, where my father was diagnosed with prostate cancer, wanted to have his prostate removed, couldn't get in for surgery for 90 days. My mom had cardiac issues, needed cardiac bypass surgery. They were going to send her home. And thankfully, they didn't, and because her son went back up there and kind of push some strings. So if you look at the availability of healthcare, let's look at screening for cancers, right? We do this really well in the United States. Mammograms, pap smears, prostate-specific antigen, colonoscopy. I'm sure a lot of people have had some of these procedures done. They're much more frequently performed in the US. Quite a difference. My business is women's imaging and mammography. 86% of the women in the United States have had mammograms versus 73% in Canada. And the recommendations here are different. They're annual versus over there, which is every 2 years. The other thing to consider also is diagnostic imaging testing. Number of MRIs and CAT scanners in the US is much higher per capita, which makes availability a lot easier. So, like most of us know, you can't evaluate what you can't measure, right? So how do you measure and evaluate the two systems, right? Forgetting all of the money that's involved. If you look at cancer, breast cancer, colon cancer, endometrial cancer, ovarian cancer, the healthcare system is not going to cause your cancer to grow or develop, right? You're going to get it because you're going to get cancer. None of these things are related to the healthcare system. So what is a way to kind of evaluate how we're doing? And I really like this. I found this as an interesting measure. Mortality rate to incidence rate ratio. So if your mortality rate's, if we take breast cancer, if your mortality rate's low, your incidence rate is what it is. The lower the mortality rate, the better we're doing at diagnosing, treating, curing, right? And if you look at these numbers, the ratio for the mortality incidence rate between the United States and Canada, US beats it every time. The only place there's anything is there's parity, meaning equal, for cervical carcinoma in women. That's the same. But we're much better at diagnosing and treating in the United States. The other metrics that people like to look at are infant mortality rate and life expectancy. If you look at the numbers, the Canadian system is marginally better, but they don't take in, one thing people don't mention is they don't take into account a couple of things. Infant mortality does not take into consideration things like drinking and smoking during pregnancy, which we do more here in the United States than we do in Canada. Life expectancy, getting right back to where Barbara was speaking about with regards to obesity, there's a lot more obesity in the United States than there is in Canada. And cardiac disease, strokes, if you take all that into account, that's the big difference. On that note, this is like a really complicated topic, and it's hard to kind of delve any further into it in 7 minutes. So I'll finish there.
Thank you, Ahmed. Our third and final speaker is Brian Cressy. A recipient of the Healthcare Lifetime Achievement Award, Brian earned his bachelor's degree in economics at the University of Washington, and MBA from Harvard Business School, and JD from Harvard Law School. Brian is the founder of Cressy & Company, a private investment firm specializing on investing in and building leading healthcare businesses. The firm focuses on investments in healthcare services, providers, facilities, and information technology. In addition to his private equity firm, Brian is also the founder of Above and Beyond Recovery Center, a donor-funded treatment facility in Chicago, providing free and innovative services to the homeless and uninsured who would otherwise have no access to treatment. Centered on a philosophy of compassion, competence, and communal healing, Above and Beyond encourages its clients to see the consequences of their behavior as something they can change. A life trustee at Lake Forest Academy and the lead donor on LFA's Art Center that bears his name, Brian was also the speaker at LFA's first Chicago networking event 13 years ago, and I thank him for the full circle by being at my final CNE today. Brian is also, and most importantly, the parent of Monique, class of 2000, Charlotte, class of 2002, and Alicia, class of 2003. Please welcome Brian Cressy.
Thanks very much, John. I'm going to say the same thing I said 14 years ago. Actually, the good news is I can't remember what I said 14 years ago. I'm going to talk about two topics. One is our American healthcare system a little bit. The other one, I do want to make a couple personal notes, things I've learned from building Above and Beyond. Start with healthcare. We all know that we're about to break the bank in American healthcare. It's going to be 20% of GDP in a few years. It was 5% 50 years ago. So it's skyrocketing up. And when you look at the future, say, is that going to stop? And the answer is no, because people, baby boomers are aging, more care needed. There's more effective treatments available. They're very expensive, but they can save lives, so we pay for them. There's a looming shortage of doctors and nurses. And look at pharmacy spend. That's kind of out of control. We have a law in the U.S. that our government biggest purchaser cannot negotiate prices on pharmacy. So that right there is a big issue. And overall healthcare spending is going to grow at 5.5% per year for the next 8 years. So it's going to go up and up and up. A lot of changes have been suggested. You look at what could be done. It's a very complex situation. Some of the suggested changes are value-based care, which simply means alongside price, measuring quality and measuring outcomes. Value-based payments, they're adjusted depending on how well a doctor does, a hospital does, etc. Those are hard to measure. Guess what? The people with the worst looking outcomes say they treat the sickest patients. So they're going to have worse. So it's very difficult. Bundled payments, which say for an event like a new knee or something, pays the hospital, the doctor involved, the surgery center, wherever it's done, one price, and they have to figure out how to split it up. That can help create incentive to lower costs, but there's all sorts of issues. Getting different groups to agree, how much do I get and how much do you get? That'll take a long time to sort out. But there will gradually be more fixed payments for fixed events or surgeries, etc. Another way to save money is to decrease the days in the hospital, because those are very, very expensive. Well, that's already happening. That's been happening. I don't remember the numbers, but they've gone down a lot over the last 20 years. That'll continue to happen, but that alone won't suffice. Transparency. A lot of young companies started that tell online, will tell you how much a doctor costs, even try to get after quality. Typically people don't use it. So it's nice to have some information there, and the information's quite imperfect. 10 years from now, maybe a lot better. Telemedicine, great idea. You can see your doctor on your iPhone, I suppose, and he or she can see you, and it can save a lot of time, especially a lot of time away from work, which is really valuable. The problem is, so far, the measurements have suggested, the studies, that it doesn't cut down on in-person visits, so that you have the same amount of, and you have more telemedicine visits. May still be effective, may save work time, but that isn't measured yet. And then we're talking about a single-payer system, Medicare for all, Medicaid for all. That would be great to have in terms of availability, but who's going to pay for it? In the U.S., that would cost a whole lot more than it does now, and there's a whole political issue getting there. a good path, I think, basically all these things are going to move really, really slowly because we got our system as it is and it's hard to change behavior. And then look at yourself and say, okay, we got a system we want to improve, and what's the transmission mechanism to get it to change? Oh, it's politics. You're going to have to get legislatures and federal congressional system to come up with a solution. Are you kidding me? I mean, they can't even shake each other's hand, let alone deal with complex problems. So it's going to take a long, long time. I think a lot of it is going to gradually be fixed by the free market, and I'll mention a couple of ways. And then I think politically there will gradually be, I'm hoping, coverage for everybody. Should happen. It could be paid for, and I think you'll see gradual incentives to spend less. Right now, the more often you go to the doctor, the more the doctor makes, fee for service. A better way, it's coming very slowly, will be the doctor gets paid X amount for seeing and for your care, whether you see him or not. If you're healthy, great. Doctor makes more money and you don't have to go, that's good. And so we're moving some incentives towards that. But a good path would be to continue with those changes, but also billing and collection. There's a warfare. Washington, D.C. is only rivaled by insurance companies not wanting to pay for care to hospitals, doctors, and patients, as you know. They delay. Probably, I think, about 25% of U.S. healthcare's administrative expenses, I think 10% is totally wasted in the battle between sending multiple bills, correcting it, etc., and getting insurance companies to pay for it. I think there's 10% of the spending to be saved there. Got to allow the government, the biggest customer, to negotiate pharma prices. It's crazy. We pay multiples of what other countries pay for the same pharmaceuticals. That, I think, will probably be able to get through Congress in the next 5 to 10 years. I know it sounds slow, but that's actually fast for that body that we're talking about. So I think you're going to see gradual improvement, things that will help healthcare IT. There's information technology, there's programs that are eliminating bottlenecks. Young companies are coming up with solutions to specific problems. That's happening. There'll be thousands of those over the next 20 years or so. Telemedicine is going to help one kind of figure out how to use it and how to make it effective, because it's a lot cheaper way and doctors can prescribe online. So telemedicine is going to help. And I think third is the American entrepreneur. We're a country with people that start companies. They finish school and then they start companies. There's a lot of that. I think American entrepreneurs, and there's tens of thousands of young healthcare companies that are creative, being started to try and solve some of these problems. So I think between the three, 20 years from now, you can look forward to a much better system, but it's going to be very, very slow. The other topic I quickly wanted to mention, a couple of minutes, is I've had the pleasure of being able to do something hands-on in terms of helping people. My partner, Bill Frist, is a heart-lung transplant surgeon and can save lives through surgery, as the physicians here have done. I couldn't do that, but I figured out I could save lives. And the way I did it, and I'm speaking to the value and the growth and love you will have if you get a chance to be hands-on and doing something to help others. I always gave a lot of money, and of course I love LFA, but this time I'd seen in my extended family some addiction problems, and I've been part of visiting different centers and being part of seeing the programs. And I was astonished. I thought they were clinically hollow, even really good places, very little treatment, and I felt so bad for the people coming in, hoping for great treatment, and getting almost nothing, I felt. And so I decided, and I recognized in Chicago, there's so many homeless have no access to care. So I thought we can come up, I saw some ways I thought would improve care and improve outcomes. They were very common sense, or I wouldn't have been able to figure them out, but they're very simple. And so I got together and started a facility, and I decided, since we're going to reinvent care, because hasn't changed for 80 years here, it's been AA, and that helps 10% of the people. But I decided we're going to reinvent and create the best care, not me, but through great clinicians and evidence-based medicine, we're going to change things. And I decided, since we're going to have the best eventually, why don't, instead of selling that to the rich for a lot of money, why don't we give it for those for free who get no care, who have no access, the poor and the homeless. So we built it on Chicago's west side, about 4 miles west of here. Dan Hostetler runs it. He's fantastic. Gloria Harper, luckily, is chair of it, and it's remarkable. And I'm not saying this to say I'm good, because I'm not, but I'm saying it to let you know we've got, what, 300 people in the program today. We've had 600 graduates over the last 2.5 years. It's really working, and we're getting better and better. But the reason I mention this is it showed me, wow, you can hands-on have an idea, and then you can go do it, and you can make it work, because what made it work was, once I had the idea and I started talking about it, I call it virtuous power. If you have a virtuous idea that seems impossible to accomplish, great people come to you to help you do it. So Dan and Gloria and a variety of people have come and made it happen. I didn't have to spend nearly as much time as I anticipated on it, because great people flock to it. People want innovation, and they want to change the world for the better, and these people are doing it. So I just mentioned it to you. It won't fit everyone, but if you get a chance in your life to hands-on do something, be part of something that's different and challenging, I encourage you to do it, because it'll bring a joy, which I've experienced in my life, that I don't get in business. I love business. I get thrills, but a continuous joy. So that's all I wanted to mention about that, because you can, I think, improve your life going forward when the opportunity arises. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. So I'm going to throw it right open to questions, because I have good time. So who has a first question for the panel?
My question is,
Sorry, it's working out for you. I'm semi-retired and I work in the 2nd grade, so I know how to use my voice. What do you think the effect on economics is, this is for anyone, of having more physicians assistants, nurse practitioners, midwives who are nurse practitioners, and I probably don't know all the other categories like that. Is that going to improve the economics, or is it not make an effect?
I'll comment on that, because I see that a lot in our various businesses. That's a very healthy and helpful trend. There's more to be done than people have time to do. We call it people practicing at the top of their license. So an LPN doing something that he or she knows how to do, a nurse doing something that a physician would otherwise have to do, but it's too simple for the physician to be really spending time on these things. So that trend is occurring, and legislation, laws are being loosened, because that has to happen to allow those people to do certain activities.
Yep.
Hi, my name is Kathy Loud, class 93. I wonder why we can't set a maximum or some kind of a recommended rate for surgeries or things like knee surgery, $10,000. And why can't the public start negotiating, saying, I'm not going to your hospital if you're not going to, do it for $10,000. What are your thoughts on that?
So, does this work?
It's green.
It's green. So, good question, right? I think the public has started speaking on this already a little bit, right? So, I've had 2 knee surgeries, and I opted to go to a surgeon who did it out of a surgical center and not out of a hospital, because the hospital would charge a lot more than the surgical center would. So that's already in place. You're seeing it a lot as well from the perspective of patients are starting to be told that they should go to urgent cares instead of the emergency room. Right? You're already seeing that from when the Affordable Care Act was instituted. all of a sudden, the copay for an emergency room visit is $400, whereas going to an urgent care is $75. So a lot of people are kind of swaying in that direction. But you have to remember, the hospitals are negotiating these things, and people don't know any better regarding where they should choose to go. Unfortunately, I think that's education. Patients are starting to be much more their own advocate when it comes to their health care, but not yet as much their own advocate when it comes to the dollars, because they think the insurance company is going to cover everything. Right? Which in general, it will cover most of everything, but it's still a lot of money that goes and gets paid out.
David.
David Gupta. Dr. Freud, can you provide some input on your feelings of the status of the Affordable Care Act and how it stands today and its destiny?
Interesting. So,
I think we're out of time now.
good question. Nice curveball. So, there's a lot. That's a loaded question. Right? So, if you really think about it, one piecemeal. One of the things that we were expecting with Affordable Care was that 8% plus number of uninsureds would be insured. It's not happening. The exchange itself, if you look at the insurance policies for people who are paying for their own insurance and not via their employer, the costs are really high for these patients, and some people are opting not to take insurance that way, right? So they're part of the uninsured population. Where it's going, I don't know. I really don't have an answer to that. I don't think anybody knows where it's going. The good part about Affordable Care was that it removed the pre-existing conditions, as we all know, right? It increased funding towards Medicare. So there are more people who were uninsured who are getting insured, but we're still not there, not even close. 20 million plus people still don't have insurance. So the question is, what are you going to do next regarding how to make things better, right? And I think you have to think a little bit in a different way. How do you incentivize people to take insurance or to make themselves more healthy, leading to what Barbara was talking about? And I think those are the things we need to think about. But Affordable Care and where it's going and how it's going to happen in the future, I can't take it any further than that, and anybody else knows the answer to that question.
I have a perspective on that from pediatrics, and I think we noticed a lot more coverage of children and access to care, and I think it was very important for them not to be excluded with a pre-existing condition. If you're born with heart disease, you're born with it, and you can't be excluded. And I think if we remove that part of it, saying you can't be excluded, imagine if everybody with obesity were excluded from care. That would be a huge problem, no pun intended. But I think we need to expand access and not look at ways to restrict access.
Patrick? Yeah. Barbara, could you just comment a little bit about ways that you think society could work? Obviously, there's a whole legislative process, and one of the things that seems to be missing is you've got all these entrenched interests which aren't necessarily advocating for the patient. But that said, can you just comment a little bit about things that you think society could do to work on the obesity issue?
I think our healthcare structure is designed for illness. And you get reimbursed for illness, and you get reimbursed heavily for procedures. And so if you're obese and you have a heart attack and you need a stent, you're covered. But if you're an obese 5-year-old and you need to see someone to prevent the further development of obesity, that's not covered. And so I think we need to shift our coverage and our reimbursement towards wellness to prevent disease. And
who's going to advocate for that?
I hope all of us. I hope all of us. But I think, and it's not as easy as individual responsibility either. That's one thing I've learned. The causes of this obesity are complex, but I can tell you that if adolescent, I think it starts with adolescent females, and if you go into pregnancy overweight or obese, or if you gain or you become obese during pregnancy, you're changing the DNA function of the fetus and of the fetus's children. And so you're guaranteeing that the fetus will become an obese adult, and that obese adult's children will become obese. So I think children don't have a huge voice in healthcare. There's no AARP for children. And I think we need to pay attention to how prevention saves a lot of money rather than paying for it for adults, because we do pay for adults that need all the comorbidities of obesity. We pay for that.
I'll add something to that as well. So if you look at the general statistics in Canada, the obesity level is much lower, much healthier. They're much more focused on wellness and primary care versus what we do here. So I think, you know, getting people to jump into that would be a great thing. And I think incentivizing patients in the population to go towards wellness versus the system of, I've got to take care of this blocked coronary artery, that's one way we should really consider things should go, hopefully, in the future. I think education's a big thing on this.
Colin.
Thank you all very much. This has been very interesting. There are two problems here that I think we are dealing with, and they're somewhat separated. One is the quality of medical care in the United States, and I think, as you mentioned, Doctor, it is first rate. We have the best availability of health care probably in the world. But the other is paying for it, and that is the issue I think that we're trying to deal with. And sometimes I think we need to separate these a little bit. About 40 years ago, when I was a kid, that was more than 40 years ago, healthcare by and large was not for profit. Hospitals were not for profit. Insurance companies were not for profit. And about 40 years ago, it was decided that by opening up healthcare to be for profit, the capitalist system would create the best product for the least amount of money. And I think 40 years of experience has shown that it worked exactly as well as we had hoped it might. Of the top OECD countries, we have by far the highest costs for medical care individually and corporately. And our outcomes in terms of death, in terms of life expectancy, infant mortality, childbirth mortality, rank pretty much near the bottom of all of these nations. And in 2015, it was estimated about 30,000 people died because they didn't have health insurance, they could not afford treatment. I know one of those people, and it was a tragedy. We pay far more for medications and supplies than any other nation. The overall profits of the health industry in 2016 was about $112 billion profit for profit rather than not for profit. That's a lot of money that could be cut out of the system. 6 insurance CEOs were paid between them $164 million in 2015. Of the top 20 lobbying industries in terms of what they spend, 5 of them are in healthcare. And together they spend over $657 million in lobbying. So we know who owns Congress in this. What can we do to ensure everybody in this country and bring those for-profit costs down to something or eliminate them completely? That would bring the cost that you had mentioned, how much our taxes would go up. If we cut all of that out, it would be a whole different ballgame. Could you comment on that, please?
I'll make a couple of comments. One is, structurally, the healthcare industry isn't very competitive. So free market competition would probably work, but when you have hospital systems that have geographic almost monopolies, oligopolies at least, in cities, you don't have open competition. in a lot of parts. In pharma, you've got the appropriate but too long patent life, you've got monopolies. And so all over the system, it's not free market competition. There's things, I won't go into it today, but there are things that could be done to break down those barriers. And suddenly, the CEOs wouldn't make $160 million. So, but a lot of change needs to be made. And a lot of it will come from education of the populace, online information, online healthcare information, kind of democratize the process with more knowledgeable patients and consumers. That'll help some too.
Also, if you look at the way things have gone with hospitals in the last 10, 15 years with all the consolidations, hospitals are just getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So they're able to negotiate these unbelievable reimbursement rates with the insurers. So yes, the insurance companies make money, absolutely. Is there a way to cut that back? I think, yeah, we can. But at the same time, I think you're seeing the hospitals are negotiating these reimbursement rates that are enormous and exorbitantly high. So there has to be a way to kind of get some parity across the board between somebody like the individual private practitioner and the hospitals, where the hospitals should come down a little bit what they're charging people. But that's the negotiation they have with the insurer. Blue Cross has over 70% market share in the city of Chicago. They do a really good job of negotiating these contracts with hospitals. About 10 years ago, if I remember correctly, Condell up on the North Shore in Libertyville had this negotiation issue with Blue Cross, and they both separated ways. So what happened to the people who were insured with Blue Cross in that scenario? They had to go find another hospital. So there has to be, I don't know how you do it. I think something with a moderator involved who's going to be able to kind of lead them down a path where it's going to be less expensive down the road. It's probably, you know, does the government have to get involved somehow? It's possible.
Well, could I add to that? A single-payer system that is run by the government, Medicare's administrative expenses are well under 2%. It is an incredibly efficient program. If you cut all of this profit out at Medicare negotiating fees, it might lower each individual's cost considerably.
Yeah, and then you know, Medicare would then be the single payer and the biggest negotiator with regards to reimbursement. One of the other things that you haven't noticed in the city of Chicago is try to find an internist who you can get into easily. It's not in a hospital system. A lot of these doctors are now opting out of Medicare, so they don't have to deal with it anymore. And the whole commoditization of the physician makes it really tough, right? So anecdotally, I have a friend of mine who's an internist. She was working in a private practice, and they got bought out by one of the hospitals in the city. The hospital then had them held to metrics, how many patients they should see in a year. I think the number was 6,000 patient visits a year, and if they didn't hit that metric, they lost bonus, they lost salary, they lost vacation time. So it becomes a little bit challenging for these doctors. So what did she do? She left. Now she's a boutique physician, as they call them now, charging $5,100 per patient per year just to be part of her practice. So people are going to find, the doctors are going to find a way to, they're not going to be happy with the lower reimbursements that would be negotiated for them individually, right? So they're going to want to do something different. And I've seen it, it's been a trend for the last 10 years.
We've got time for one final question. Okay.
Hi, I'm Sydney Linger. I'm a senior at LFA. I don't have quite as much research prepared for my question, but I am currently studying the opioid crisis for a capstone project, and I'm researching what the US is doing to find the theoretical cure and then what other countries are doing. So I just wanted to know what your opinion was on if the US healthcare system is taking the most effective approach to find that theoretical cure.
I think the answer is unfortunately no. It's a complex problem. I think from a physician standpoint, the country is going after it with less prescribing, more appropriate prescribing. The treatment side of it is really difficult. once it's happened, it's a long, arduous process, but it is getting better. There's medications, Suboxone in particular, that can help decrease the cravings. It's expensive, but it can be done. I think that combined with therapy and life circumstances, working on how people think about their life proactively instead of reactively, can make a real difference. But the treatment side is very, very difficult. We're making progress on, I think, coming into the funnel numbers.
The other thing that's happening now is individual states are requiring physicians to do a lot of continuing education regarding opioids and prescriptions. And there's now a whole prescription monitoring program that's been put in place where physicians who are prescribing these opioids are now under more scrutiny. They're being found as there are some people who are prescribing way too much, and it doesn't make any sense how much they're prescribing. So they're being monitored now, whereas in the past they were not. So that's at least a step in the right direction.
Thank you. And I'd like to thank everyone for great questions and for your attention, but particularly in my final Chicago networking event. I'd really like to thank the panel for tremendous presentations today and for really raising it. Thank you for coming, and I won't see you next year.
The rest of us come back.